So we're here with a new Grail and a new suspension fork. Can you tell
Correct.
me why suspension and why not just bigger tyres, which might be an obvious sort of question from viewers?
Yeah, in the first place, back in the days where we started developing this suspension fork together with DT, all these big tires wasn't really a topic. Anyways, it can cover 50 millimeter of tires. So the easy answer would be just use both suspension fork and bigger tires. But we all know that bigger tires will benefit in rough descents and in fast and really technical flat sections where we really need this responsiveness from the tire. But the tire won't be able to do like the big bumps. It will only handle the vibrations, and the fork does. So it can handle the bigger bumps and the vibrations. So actually you could do 40 millimeter tire setup with the suspension fork, and you will have even more benefits than riding a 50 or 54 millimeter tire in the front.
Yes, that's right, viewers. Canyon has today launched version 2 of its Grail gravel race bike with a brand new DT Swiss F132 ONE suspension fork, providing 40 mil of travel. Now, the Grail frame itself isn't any different, it's not new, and as such has a rather limited, in my humble opinion, tyre clearance as the old bike, but the Canyon product manager did allude to there perhaps being a change on its front.
There's no changes to the Grail in terms of tyre clearance. The suspension geometry was there from the outset, so the frame is the same. You've not made any changes to that. Do you feel it's a missed opportunity to not upgrade the Grail with more tyre clearance at the back to match the bigger tyre clearance at the front, perhaps?
Yeah, as we co-developed the suspension fork with the same engineer that does the frame, together with DT, actually the fork of the Grail was intended to be coexisting with the suspension fork anyways.
Oh, from the outset, so all those years ago you had suspension in mind with the Grail.
Correct.
Okay, so
yes.
it's not a new thing, you've been working on it in the background.
Yes,
okay.
That's nothing new, and so the frame is the same, but it was in mind that we will play around with suspension forks. And of course, yes, I can say that it's a little unfortunate that you can run bigger tires in the back for now, okay. But let's see what comes from Canyon in the next year.
Okay,
so.
Exciting. Thank you very much.
Now, I rode the new bike with the suspension fork at the Traka, the big gravel event outside Girona in Spain last month, in perhaps the most adverse conditions I've experienced in a long, long time. Straight into my top 10 of muddiest, wettest rides. And speaking as somebody based in the UK, that is saying something indeed. So we rode the 100-kilometer event, and it took me about 4 hours. So 4 hours I've had on the bike and the fork, and I'll share my impressions on that fork later in today's video, and whether I think suspension is a good thing or a bad thing on a gravel bike, and who it's for and who it's not for. But first, let's go into details about the fork and what it is and what it isn't. This might just be the best suspension fork you can buy right now for a gravel bike, but it's not without its issues. Now, DT Swiss is highly regarded for its range of wheels and hubs, but they've also been making suspension forks for mountain bikes in the past as well, but never really caught on or been a threat to RockShox and Fox to really dominate the suspension world in the mountain bike market. But they brought that technology and that expertise over the last 4 years of development and testing to a brand new gravel bike, and really partnered with Canyon to develop a product that does have a lot of benefits for a gravel bike. Firstly, it looks fantastic. It's a really seamless look on a carbon fiber gravel bike, thanks to the angled crown compared to the rather sort of square off design of a regular mountain bike inspired suspension fork. Then there's a reverse arch, so from the front it looks very lightweight and slender. But then the other big USP of this suspension fork is the internal routing for the brake hose and the lockout cable. Most suspension forks have external routing for the brake hose, which on a bike like the Grail with full internal routing does look a bit janky. So full internal routing and a very sleek, slender fork, and does look really good. So the fork delivers 40 millimeters of travel from a linear air spring with a positive and negative air chamber, There isn't a 30 or a 50mm option, it's just 40 at launch. Whether that changes, I have no idea, but there's no talk about shorter or longer travel options in the press kit for the bike. And then there's rebound adjustment with 9 levels of adjustment. And then there's a cable operated remote lockout lever on the drops, a big sort of U-bend plastic lever inside the drops on the handlebars. And I did find on the negative, I had to modify my position of my hand on the drops and basically go a bit lower than I would like. The lever is where my natural hand position would be, but on the positive, it's very easy to adjust on the fly, and it's a simple push to lock out and push to unlock. So push, lock, push, unlock, very easy to work on the fly, and a big lever you can operate in the drops and in the tops as well. So reasonably ergonomic, and after 4 hours of riding in the most adverse conditions I've raced a bike in a long time, the lever was feeling a bit crunchy towards the end of that ride. And after 2 hours of using the lever for the road sections and the off-road sections, I resorted to leaving it open because a few times I found I forgot to unlock it. I couldn't remember if I locked it or unlocked it. So I think the lever could be improved, a simpler way to remind yourself whether it's locked or unlocked. But after 2 hours of riding, I simply left it unlocked most of the time, because as somebody used to suspension on mountain bikes, I don't mind a fork moving around a bit, and it's not bouncy. When you're on the road, it's very composed and move around much at all, very well damped in those situations. I found the fork easy to set up and get a good bass tune with the recommended settings with my body and rider kit combined weight. There's clearance for a 50mm tyre, but Canyon athletes have been using a 2.1 inch mountain bike tyre. You can fit a mud guard as well, and one neat detail is the option to fit bike packing mounts on the fork legs that give you up to 3 kilos of load lugging capacity on each fork leg. So great for bike packing and ultra distance riding, and leave them at home if you're racing, keep the weight as minimum as possible. And then the weight, well, it's heavier than a carbon fork naturally and weighs a claimed 1,340 grams, but that's heavier than a RockShot Rudy at 1,300 grams, heavier than a Fox 32 at about 1,230 grams, and quite a bit heavier than a brand new Cane Creek Invert SL, which is just 990 grams. So carrying quite a bit of extra weight over those rivals in this space right now. And how much does this new fork cost? Well, I've no idea. There is no price for the fork because you can't buy it on its own yet. For the first year, it will be exclusive to Canyon on the new Grail, and then after that, be available on other bike brands, other OEM partners to DT Swiss, and then hopefully after that, available to buy aftermarket. Which means if you own a current Grail and want to upgrade to a new suspension fork, you sadly can't, which I think is a bit of an own goal, because there are lots of people out there who own a current Grail. So if you want this suspension fork, you have to buy a whole new bike, which is a bit of a shame really, a bit of a missed opportunity to sell people with the current Grail this new suspension fork, given it fits so easily. Now, DT Swiss have shared some testing data, in-house testing on the fork, and very simply riding over a plank of wood with the fork and with a rigid fork and 40mm and 50mm tyres. And the testing data is very interesting and very insightful. But as with all data shared by manufacturers, take it with a pinch of salt. It's their data, not mine, just sharing their data. But does show a clear reduction in peak force when hitting that plank of wood at high speeds, especially when using the 50mm tyre with a suspension fork versus the 40mm with the suspension fork, and compared with having no suspension fork. So yeah, it does show some interesting differences there. But I can't wait to try and do my own testing back home when I get the bike and fork for testing here in the Cotswolds, and maybe replicate that testing, but take it a step further and see whether a mountain bike tyre with a rigid fork is better than a narrow tyre and a suspension fork. So yeah, I can't wait to do that. Stay tuned for that by subscribing to the channel, hit that button down below. So I rode the new bike with the fork in the Traka, the 100km race, 4 hours of racing in the most adverse conditions, as wet and muddy and gritty as it gets, straight into my top 10 of all time muddiest, horrendous rides I've ever experienced, speaking as somebody based in the UK and used, as I am, to mud. So apologies for the lack of filming from the actual event, but here's a photograph of my bike at the finish line and my very muddy face. I wear contact lenses and I couldn't see anything out of my eye the whole afternoon after a race. It filled with mud and grit and was pretty bloody awful. Anyway, the bike. Now, I said it before, I'll say it again, that I do believe suspension on a gravel bike, even though it's only 40mm travel, does serve a purpose and does have a place. It won't be for a lot of people, because a lot of people in the comment section right now will be saying, just buy a hardtail mountain bike. And if you want to, you can. Nobody's stopping you. Nobody's forcing you to buy the suspension fork on a gravel bike. But if you are riding gravel or you're racing gravel over a variety of terrain, rough and smooth, you do a long distance, the riding a rigid gravel bike, even with big mountain bike tyres, is pretty rough. So what's better than a mountain bike tyre is a big tyre with suspension fork. And I think the beauty of suspension and big tyres is the ability to tune the air pressure in the fork and the tyre pressure. And big tyres on a gravel bike are a fantastic thing. 45 is better than 40 and 50 is better than 45. And we are seeing tyres getting bigger and bigger, and even now mountain bike tyres. And one of the reasons many people are using bigger tyres is more comfort. And the downside of just using a big tyre is the compromise with tyre pressure, as I found at the Grail in Scotland 2 weekends ago. You're trying to run the tyre as low as possible to maximise the amount of compliance and comfort from the big tyre, but not so low that you risk a puncture. Now the benefit, the beauty potentially of suspension and big tyres, is you can tune the tyre pressure and the air spring in the fork to work together in perfect harmony and potentially allow you to run low pressures and have a suspension fork as a backup on big impacts to minimise the risk of a puncture, or run a bigger tyre at high pressure to minimise a puncture and get the comfort and traction from the suspension fork. So I can see that happening, especially with the trend for bigger and bigger tyres. And the overriding benefit of suspension on a gravel bike, as it is with mountain bikes in my experience, is more control when riding rough, techie trails, way more comfort for your arms when riding a long distance over rough terrain, and you carry more speed into rough sections. And the number of people I pass at the Grail and the Traka going downhill with my mountain bike background is astonishing. And I can see suspension being, as I spoke to Freddie Overt at the finish line of the Traka, he'd be riding the new Grail with a suspension fork, and he says, as a roadie, the suspension fork is a real skills boost to him. And it's given him the added advantage to really keep up with his rivals and peers on the downhills, where previously he said he was getting dropped. So a real benefit there. So some pros and cons on my first ride on the new DT Swiss fork. The pros are, it works really well. 40mm of well-damped, well-controlled travel does work really nicely. It looks fantastic, really seamless with the internal routing, and you have a lockout lever if you want that for the road sections as well. But on the downside, it's quite heavy and heavier than rivals. That lockout lever is a bit clunky, and an electronic lever would be much better, and I have concerns around its long-term reliability as a cable in the winter, through the UK winter. And you can't buy it as an upgrade if you own a Grail or another bike. Canyon is debuting the new fork on one single model of the Grail, the CFR Rift Edition, which is the bike I rode, costing €8,000 with a Shimano GRX Di2 2x group set and a Canyon gear groove handlebar. Now, the Grail frame itself is unchanged from the one I reviewed at launch 3 years ago. So the same tyre clearance, which in my mind is limited. And I did a whole video around how tyre clearance on a Grail isn't sufficient. And that's linked above in case you missed it. So with the new fork, you can go up to 50mm on the front or a 2.1 inch mountain bike tyre. But on the back, you can't fit a 50 or a 2.1 inch mountain bike tyre on the back, as is very trendy right now. But the Canyon product manager did allude to perhaps being a change on the front.
There's no changes to the Grail in terms of tyre clearance. The suspension geometry was there from the outset, so the frame is the same. you've not made any changes to that. Do you feel is it a missed opportunity to not upgrade the Grail with more tyre clearance at the back to match the bigger tyre clearance at the front, perhaps?
Yeah, as we co-developed the suspension fork with the same engineer that does the frame, together with DT, actually the fork of the Grail was intended to be coexisting with the suspension fork anyways.
From the outset, so all those years ago, you had suspension in mind with the Grail.
Correct.
Okay, so
yes.
it's not a new thing. You've been working on it in the background.
Yes.
Okay.
That's nothing new, and so the frame is the same, but it was in mind that we will play around with suspension forks. And of course, yes, I can say that it's a little unfortunate that you can run bigger tires in the back for now, but let's see what comes from Canyon in the next year.
Okay,
so.
Exciting. Thank you very much.
So really interesting launch from Canyon today. Really excited to see the suspension fork from DT Swiss, and it does work really well. I can't wait to try the bike and the fork on local trails and do some of my own in-house testing versus big tyres and a rigid fork. But a shame there's only one model. A shame you can't buy it separately. A shame it's not as light as other forks on the market. And a shame the Grail platform itself is unchanged and doesn't have bigger tyre clearance. So yeah, sort of a mixed response to this launch. I like what we're doing. I'm excited by suspension, but a bit confused by some of the other choices around the Grail platform, the tyre clearance, and the fact you can't buy a fork aftermarket if you own a Grail right now. So yeah, first impressions, let me know what you think by dropping a comment down below. And if you want to see some of the best bikes from the Traka, which Canyon sponsor, then watch this video right here.